My name is Angela. I work at Onkaparinga Libraries, and I'm joined today by Eve, who also works with Onkaparinga Libraries. Say hello, Eve.
Hello.
And of course, we've got Graeme Base, our star attraction for today. So it's lovely to see so many people online and here to listen to Graeme. So before we start, I just wanted to say a few things. I wanted to thank Digitales, especially Sally, for helping us get online today. So thank you. And I also wanted to thank Graeme, obviously, for being with us today. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries at all. Because we're locked down here in Melbourne, there wasn't an awful lot else that was on my diary. So more than happy to have a chat.
Excellent. So before we get started, if you've got any questions that you would like to ask, if you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and ask your questions there. And at the end of our questions and our chat, Eve is going to ask all the questions that we get. So if you can't see the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, just hover your mouse over the bottom and it will come up. There's also a chat screen there, which you may have already seen. Eve has put some links in there for books that you can get. So if you wanted to get any of Graeme's books, you can put them on hold at the library. You can pop into the library because we are open, or you can give us a call or do it online. Alternatively, you could buy his books at Dimmicks at Glenelg. They've stocked all of his books. So if you want to own some of these amazing books, get it in the screen, then you could do it that way as well. So if there's no other questions for now, I'm going to get started. And I wanted to say firstly, because I was obviously thinking, I'm going to be talking to Graeme today. I've got to know more about what he's been doing with his stuff. And I actually didn't realise that your first book was published in 1983. And you've got over 30 books that have been published.
I don't know. By the way, can you hear me okay? Is the volume good?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how that's happened.
Well, I felt very old when I was thinking, because when I first became a fan of your books was when Animalia came out when I was 16. So in 1986, even as a 16-year-old, I loved Animalia. That's my all-time favourite book. And so my first question to you is, what is your favourite book?
Well, I tell you what, it's hard not to love a book like Animalia. It was the book that kind of changed my life. Before that, I had done one other book, which I had totally written and illustrated, called My Grandma Lived in Gooley Gulch, which had been published in Australia. And I thought, well, that's fantastic, to be published. It was an amazing thing. And then Animalia came along, and it didn't seem like, an incredible world-beating idea. It was really, what is it? It's an alphabet book. It's not as though it hadn't been done before. But I spent 3 years working on this thing just because I just wanted to illustrate everything in the world. And that was my best effort. And incredibly, it just took off. Everyone else sort of enjoyed it as well. And then from then on, well, that was my career. But there is another book, actually, which has been very, very dear to my heart, which is called The Discovery of Dragons. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been drawing monsters and dragons. And the very first thing I ever took to a publisher was an idea for a book about dragons. And it took a few more years before it finally got published. But I think for that reason, because it was like a childhood dream, that one's a real favourite as well.
I really like that book too, because it's got dragons in it. So you have to like that book. What has influenced your art style, where do you get your ideas from? What gives you that inspiration?
Oh,
that's a lot of questions all at once.
Where do you get your ideas from? Wow. But look, in terms of very early influences, when I was at school, I was always interested in art. It was my thing, art and English, funnily enough, and music. There was an artist, a German artist who lived in the 1400s, 15th century, called Albrecht Dürer, and he did beautiful, detailed woodcuts, and so they were prints, and they were black and white, but I just thought they were fantastical and wonderful. I then, when I was a little older, read for the first time The Lord of the Rings, way before there was movies or anything like that, and it was a colossally big book, but I just fell in love with it, and I read it probably 11 or 12 times while I was in high school. And those two things combined to give me a love of fantasy. So I suppose I always, when I was, I always wanted to be an artist, and it was always going to be fantasy, fantastical things from my own imagination or from make-believe. And what's kept me going over the years is actually travel. I've been incredibly lucky that my job has meant that I've had to sort of tour and do book tours and stuff. And I would always tack on a bit of just sightseeing along with it if I could. And sometimes I was able to take the family and we would go to amazing places all over the world. And I know that every time I travel, I'm going to come back with another idea for another book, because I don't know, I suppose my mind just works that way. If I see something wonderful, amazing, then I want somehow to capture it or to draw it. And so I'll think of an idea for a book and make it real.
Would you consider illustrating another author's book?
Well, I have, not for a long time, but that was another influence very early on, was Lewis Carroll and things like, Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. And he wrote a wonderful nonsense magical poem called The Jabberwocky, or Jabberwocky, and full of made up words. The first verse is, "'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe." Now, I don't know what it means, but it sounds fantastic. And it was actually the first first and only poem that I've ever known off by heart. So I was asked some years into my early career by a publisher whether I would illustrate a book for them, and they suggested Jabberwocky. So I just leapt at it and said, absolutely. But since then, I've just had so many of my own ideas that there just hasn't been room or time to entertain, collaborations.
Is there any one person that you would like to collaborate with, if you had the opportunity?
Oh, wow. That's really difficult. So in terms of writers, or, somehow I feel as though I would rather collaborate with somebody who wasn't a writer or an illustrator, but perhaps a musician or a sculptor or some sort of 3D artist or somebody working in the world of digital work. I've often thought for a long time there's been all this talk about the digitization of the world and apps and ebooks and stuff, and yet I haven't really got into it. I haven't been that interested in that in terms of originating. I'm very happy to do things like Animalia with the Animalia app. It's been fantastic to sort of take that book and expand it. But as for actually creating something new for that medium, I probably don't know enough about it. Maybe I kind of missed the cut. I'm too old to sort of really get it. But if I could, so to work with somebody who really understood how to make things, really creative, in the app world or in the digital world, it would be a lovely collaboration. Probably more than actually working, with a writer as such.
You're never too old to learn.
Thank you.
Obviously you said when you travel you get ideas for things. How do you keep all of those ideas? Like, do you have a storage mechanism, or do you start sketching the minute you have ideas? What gives you...
all the time. I say, and sometimes it's really obvious where an idea comes from. The first time I ever went scuba diving, and that was actually overseas, because in Australia I wasn't allowed to go scuba diving when I was young because I used to get asthma, and you're not allowed to go scuba diving. And I found out in other parts of the world they don't care if you want to go underwater and kill yourself. It's up to you. So I did, but I happily didn't kill myself. But what I remember while I was actually underwater. And we were in I was going to say the Caribbean, but the Caribbean, as we call it, and I was scuba diving, and my wife Robin was scuba diving next to me. And for the first time, I used to snorkel a lot, but there's nothing like, being able to just not have to hold your breath, go and have a quick look, but actually just be able to stay there and watch and look at a coral reef. The detail, the life upon life, the colour. And I turned to Robin, who was scuba diving next to me, and I said, and I quote, I said, "Oh, oh, oh, oh." And she knew exactly what I'd said. I'd said, "This is the next book." And she went, as well. So as soon as I got out and dried off, I started drawing and writing, and it became The Sign of the Seahorse, which was about my 4th book, I think. But sometimes it's really, really weird where an idea comes from. I was traveling in Europe, in France, and with a family, and we stayed in some hotel somewhere, and on the wall there was a lamp, and the lamp was a sort of a brass lamp, and it was sort of swirly, a curled kind of, you know, decorative thing, and it looked a bit like a snail, and the what's it called, the shade bit it was curved, it looked like a bit of like a sail. So I said to the kids, they were young, they were sort of sitting there, and I said to the kids, hey, look kids, a snailing ship. And they just sort of went, yeah, whatever, Dad. So they weren't terribly interested, but I thought it was kind of cute. So I drew my little picture of a snail with sails. And it just goes, you know, I'm drawing all the time. It just went away in my luggage. And when we got back to Australia, unpacking all the stuff, and I came across this little drawing again, and I thought, oh, you're kind of cute. So I drew it again and again, and it became a galleon, and it took on extra interest. And sure enough, eventually, some years later, I produced a book called The Legend of the Golden Snail. And that came from this lamp on the wall of a hotel. Weird.
So sometimes you have an idea and then it doesn't come into fruition until much further down the track. So,
well, the dragons, for example, you know, that was a childhood thing. Also, when I was very young, I made a book, and I was very lucky actually that my mum used to keep everything that I did. And there was one which was just a very tiny little thing on lined paper and coloured pencil, stapled together, and it said a field guide to monsters of the world, because monsters, of course, you know, right there were dragons. And it was only about 10 years ago that I finally did a book called The Amazing Monster Detectoscope, which is about, you know, this little fella, he's a little puppy, who's finding all the monsters which are hidden around his house. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I was young, I used to imagine there was like monsters under the bed and stuff like that. But when you look, they weren't there. You know, what's going on there? And so I figured, well, they must be very good at hiding. So that's what the monster detectoscope is. It's a way of finding all the monsters, you know, which live in your house. I was going to say something else then, but I've forgotten because I got too excited about monsters. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You go.
excellent. So I'm going to hand over to Eve now, and we're going to see if there's any questions from our audience.
Rightio.
We have got the questions streaming in for you, Graeme. So the first one comes from Tilly, and she would like to know, what does it feel like to first write a book?
Well, as the first writing a book is something you do when you're very young, and you just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. The amazing thing is when you're first published. That's incredible. I was saying before that the first book that I actually wrote and illustrated, called My Grandma Lived in Gooley Gulch, was back in 1983, so I was, 25. But prior to that, I'd actually had a bit of a problem. I'd always wanted to be an artist, and I went to college after I finished high school, and I did a course called graphic design, which kind of was training me for a life in advertising, doing work for, you know, I suppose newspaper ads and magazine articles and stuff like that. And I graduated and got a job, and I hated it. It was awful. And what's more, and they hated me. And I went through about 3 jobs, as I recall, in about a year and a half. And I got fired from the 3rd one and realized this wasn't going to work out. So I started taking all the pictures which I'd been doing at night just for my own entertainment around to publishers. And I thought maybe I'd be able to do some book jackets. And I got 1 or 2 jobs doing book jackets, because every book has to have a cover. And then I got a job doing some illustrations for other people's stories, just 1 or 2, very, very early on. And so those were my first experiences of getting published. And yeah, it was wonderful for a start. I could pay the rent, and it was wonderful to have the book. But there's nothing like when I wrote My Grandma Lived in Gooley Gulch, and it got accepted. And, you know, a year or so later, when I finished the artwork, there it was. Yeah, it's a magical feeling. It's worth waiting for and worth working towards, like anything in life.
Well, following on from that, I think one of our audience members, Sienna, is looking for some tips to maybe follow in your footsteps. She asks, how do you make really good books?
Well, I don't know. It's sort of like how do you become a really good footy player or mathematician or anything? And I think I've thought about it over the years because I've been asked, and I think that there's a couple of things which occur to me. And the first is a quote from a really, really famous, or at the time, rich guy in America back in the late or early 1900s, I suppose, called John Paul Getty. And he'd become incredibly rich by, as an oil baron, he drilled for oil. And he once wrote, he said, secret of success, it was rise early, work hard, strike oil. But I realized, well, what does that really mean? And then I thought, well, it's a whole lot of words which start with P. The first is passion, and then perseverance, perhaps persistence, perspiration, and also a word for luck, provenance or providence. And if you have all of those things, it can combine in that way, because rise early means be excited, have passion, want to do things, work hard, persistence, perseverance, and then you do need luck too. You need to have the right idea at the right time. How many people have sort of thought of things, but it's already been done? You know, it's happened to me. Or you just got to meet the right people at the right time. Sometimes that happens. So you've also got to have a bit of luck as well. But none of it's going to happen. You make your own luck. There's another great quote, actually. A writer called Mark Twain was once, bailed up by a journalist who was, a little bit sort of, aggressive. And he said, hey, so, Mr. Twain, you're a very lucky man, huh? And Mark Twain apparently said to him, yeah, it's a funny thing. The harder I work, the luckier I get. So yeah, you really do make your own luck. You've got to work hard. You've got to be prepared to be knocked back, but you just keep going, and eventually, with a bit of luck, you'll get there.
Some good life advice there, I think. Now, our next question, I'm always interested to hear everybody's answer in this because I'm a librarian. Iggy and Noah would like to know, what is it that you like about books? I like
the interface. And isn't that a word you hear all the time about, new digital interfaces and stuff like that, which are fantastic. And again, we should be talking about the app at some point because I'm really excited about that. But the interface of a book, now that is something amazing, isn't it? It's just made out of paper and string and glue and bound together. But the way you can go through it and book and turn back and scan and see so much in one time and fantastic colors, and it's different in different lights. I reckon that's the thing I like most about books is, well, I suppose the word is tactility, the touch, the smell, the feel, all of that, the weight, and I just don't think that's you can't do better than that, frankly. I just love it.
I agree, totally agree. Now,
so, yeah, I tell you this, can I just say something else too? If I write something and then I've got to edit it, I can't edit it on screen. I print it out, because when you print it out, you can see the gaps, you can see the mistakes. You read differently off a page than you do the screen. Again, this might be old man speaking, but no, seriously, because I just realized that my kids say, "Oh, that's rubbish, Dad." No, it's fine. I said, no, look, you've got a double space there between those two words, and they go, "It doesn't matter." I said, "Well, it does to me, because I love that sort of thing. I love fine tuning things and editing. That's so important. Is editing over and over and over. Anyone can write something, just go blah, 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 and write, long. The trick is writing something short, because, if I say, okay, write me a story about what you did this morning, and take a page, well, you can do it. And I'll say, okay, that was a bad example, but something, an idea or a story, write it in a page. Now write it in a paragraph, and now write it in a sentence. And you have to really edit down, saying, what is it that I am really, really trying to say here? And that's what editing is about, getting rid of the dross, the stuff that doesn't need to be there. lots of adjectives, you know, and adverbs. Just get rid of them and just come down to the absolute nub of what it is you're trying to say. I don't know why I'm blathering now, aren't I? Obviously, I need to stop and listen to the next question. Sorry.
Not at all. I think everyone could listen to you talk forever. Now, you did say that you're an old man, which I totally disagree with, but you are embracing technology with your new app. So did you want to talk a little bit about that to us?
Yeah, look, yeah, as I said, I thought I missed the cut with that. And I came across these guys who I've been working with for years, who'd been helping me do all the translating the artwork into books. And it's called pre-press, where they have to do, you know, very, very sort of clever stuff on computers to prepare a book ready for printing. And they were the ones who've sort of led the charge here, saying, all right, well, you know, the world is changing, Graeme, and what about we delve into Animalia and find out, you know, what's beneath the surface of that book? And one really simple example was, in every page of Animalia, there's this, you know, little boy, which is, you know, nominally me when I was a kid, when I was like, you know, I don't know, 8 or something. I used to have blonde hair. He's hiding somewhere in each picture. And they said, yeah, but in the digital world, next time you open that picture, he can be hiding somewhere else. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's going to be fun. And there's so much stuff in Animalia, which I realized people maybe weren't finding. So I wanted to sort of, you know, open it up where you can delve in, and I just chose a few items which would be said, can you find, and, you know, and sort of like scavenger hunts. And on the way to finding those things, your kids would start seeing all the other bits and pieces, you know, which I hidden in the pages, and playing some of those classic sort of games. There's this game called Butterfly Builder, where which is sort of, it used to be called Hangman when I was a kid, where you have to try and figure out the missing letters and work out the word and so forth, and then go and find it in the pages. And that classic game of memory, where you turn over cards and try and find matching ones and reveal a picture beneath. So that was all, I suppose, stuff from my own childhood, which I was guessing that kids would still enjoy. But the whole app is based on words, on the love of words, and understanding and learning words. And it's collared for young kids and older again, so that you don't get swamped by, you know, stuff which is too technical, I suppose, too young. But along the way, absolutely fundamentally, this has to be fun. You know, there's nothing worse than we said, all right, today we're going to learn about adverbs, and, you know, or we're going to learn about adding up, or whatever it is. It's got to be fun, because that's the way everybody learns best, is not to be told they're learning something, but saying, hey, let's do this. It's going to be, and in making it enjoyable, and before you know it, you've learned something. So that was the whole push behind the Animalia app, was that even though it's called Animalia Education, education, whatever, let's have some fun. And along the way, I guarantee you'll come out knowing a bit more about words.
And that's available now on the App Store and the Google Play Store?
I certainly hope so. If not, I need to talk to somebody.
It is. I've just had a look and it's in there. Now, we've had some questions from the students at Happy Valley Primary School come through as well, which I think everybody might like to know the answer to this one. What are you working on next?
Okay, at the moment I'm digging a big hole in the garden, in which I'm going to build an artist studio for my wife, because we just moved into a new house. However, in terms of books, I've actually been doing a couple. I've been traveling in China, which has been really, really interesting over the last 5 years, and doing some books specifically for a publisher over there. And there's one which came out recently, which was first published in China and now here with Penguin, called Moonfish, and now a second one in a trilogy. This is the second one, called The Tree. So that's just coming out really soon. As for new things on the drawing board for me, I'm working on a book called The Curse of the Vampire Robot, which is all sort of like, you know, vampires and computers and robots and stuff like that. And I'm really, really pleased with that. And funnily enough, right at the beginning of this, I mentioned that woodcut artist Albrecht Dürer, back from the 1500s, and how he was an early influence. Well, the artwork for this book, I'm trying to make it look as though it might have been done around then. It's nowhere near as good as Albrecht Dürer, I'm afraid. But the idea is to sort of make it look as though it's sort of like really old, and yet it's got computers and iPhones and things like that in it. So that's been a bit of fun. That's not out till next year, though.
We'll have to keep our eye out for it. Now, lots and lots of children are wanting to know, how long does it take you to write and illustrate your books? They're so intricate, it must be a long process.
It is, although I am getting quicker. I remember with Animalia, I worked on that book for 3 years. So imagine that, thinking, what were you doing 3 years ago? And working on one project for the whole that time. It just does your head in. But that was, and then I did the 11th Hour, which took about 2 years. But now, hey, I can get a book done in a year, no problem at all. The writing of it isn't that hard. Initially, or getting the ideas come to me all the time, and I just, they all line up. And doing the first rough draft of how the story might work is okay. And then because I both do the writing and the illustrating, after I've got a text where I think, yeah, that's what I want to say, I'll leave that alone. And then everything I do from then on is all to do with the artwork, the visuals, how it's going to look, what will be happening on each page. And then just as I begin to, and that can be months of just scribbling and drawing and thinking and researching, character designs and places and stuff like that, and getting big, swags of information. And then I'll go back to the text again. And then that's when I start on that editing process, which I was talking about, where I go, is there a better way of saying this? And then, I try to get it down to, from a paragraph or, to just a sentence. And then if I want to, just to color it, I can just add a bit, just to make it more exciting. Is there a better word than happy, is joyous or ecstatic or whatever, things like that. Now, that's what makes a book, I think, in the end, sing and satisfy in every way, that you can look into every corner of it, or look at every word and think, yeah, that's there for a purpose, and it helps the whole. But it doesn't come slowly. So there's no way that you can just, like with a picture, you can't just, say, oh, I'm going to draw a picture and just start at one side and go through to the other side and go, ba-dum, perfect. It just doesn't work that way. You have to plan it. You have to decide what's going to be in the foreground, what's going to be in the background. And it's the same with the book. You've just got to work out the layers, what the simple story is, what the deeper meaning is, how you're going to express this, where the humor is going to be, all of those things. And it just like everything, like learning anything or doing anything, you've got to be prepared to put time in, and you'll be so much happier with the result.
Wonderful. Now, I think this might be our lucky last question, because I'm aware we're about to run out of time.
When is it? We did start late, so I'm happy to go over if we can, but I understand if kids have got to go off and do other stuff.
Thanks, Graeme. Now, Patrick would like to know, how do you create some of the strange words that are in your books, like the worst band in the universe?
Yeah, there are some funny words in that one, and another one called Uno's Garden, which had all these made up animal names. In fact, that's the one that I can remember more recently. Worst Band in the Universe, I was a kid when I did that book, and I know there were some sort of weird names like what what was it? What was the Spling Twanger? That was the guitar that Sprock used to play. Yeah, I mean, but it sounds like it. That's a good example. Spling Twanger. Now, if you think about a guitar, bing, doing, doing, spling twanger, spling twanger, yeah. Or things like in Uno's Garden, the animals. I've got things like moopaloops, lumpy bums, snortle pigs, snagglebites. They all have a sort of a musicality about them. And I suppose I just think that in some ways, words and pictures and music, they're all very, very sort of closely linked. And the sound of words is very important in selecting them. Lots of, like there's it's called onomatopoeia, where there's something like a meow, which sounds like what a cat does. So it's MEOW because it sounds like that. And there's many words like that. Slithering for snakes. The sound of the word suggests what it means. So I suppose over the forever, writers and musicians and artists have been listening and looking at the world around them and trying to reflect it in what they do. And that's what those made-up words are for me. It's like what Jabberwocky, "'Twas brillig and the slidey toves did gyre and gimble in the way." It's just the sound of the words, isn't it? That's so beautiful.
Definitely. And I absolutely love the alliteration in Animalia too. The Lions page is my favourite. Now, all right, we might squeeze one more question in. What book are you reading at the moment?
Do you know what? I have actually got myself hooked on a periodical, a weekly periodical called New Scientist. And for my father used to read this, and then my brother, and every now and then they'd give me a sort of a copy that they'd finish with, because I just find science really compelling and really interesting. I will sort of read about, nuclear biology and astrophysics and understand almost nothing, but just be excited by the creativity. This is another thing that I think people think that at one far end of human sort of endeavor, there's art, and at the other, there's science. And it's not actually true, because the two are equally creative. And I think it's much more of a circle where you've got art, and then there's a whole sort of circle of other things you can do in life, and it comes back, and right next door is science. And the two things are absolutely premised on being creative, on thinking that something could be possible. What if this, what if that? And then problem solving, finding a way to make the ideas real, or to prove or discover things. So actually my reading tends to be scientific rather than anything else.
What a beautiful way to put it. And New Scientist magazine is very, very popular in our libraries as well. Now, I'm going to throw it back to Angela to wrap us up. Thank you so much, Graeme. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise.
Excellent. I was just looking at Animalia because, as I've said before, it's my favourite book. Diabolical dragons daintily devouring delicious delicacies. I used to love finding all of the D words on that page, and I thought you were like the trendsetter in the 80s, because now you've got the Where's Wally's and all of these maze books where you're finding all of the little characters in the book, but you were the original.
I don't know that I was the original. It was certainly the sort of thing that I always loved when I was a kid. There used to be something called the Coles Funny Picture Book when I first came to Australia. I was born in England, but when we came to Australia, there was this thing, the Coles Funny Picture Book, really old-fashioned, archaic thing, but it did that. It had sort of things hidden in the pictures. And I loved the puzzles. So I think that's what led me to something like Animalia. I can't pretend that I invented it.
Because you can find something in that page, in all of the pages, you can find something different every time you look at them. It's like totally amazing.
And at least in the book, they're always in the same place. But if you go into the app,
they're in different spots. Yes. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Graeme. It's been very interesting chatting with you. Thank you all our attendees for joining us today. I hope you all learned something new as well. And if you would like to follow our Facebook page or our website, you'll get all our other events coming up. We always got some exciting online authors. On Thursday, we've got Jackie French. So yeah, we've got all great things coming up. So thank you everyone for attending. Like our Facebook page, look at our website. Keep coming back to all these events, because it's lastly, I forgot to say, we'll send you a feedback form through the email. If you can respond to that, that would be really good, because that will give us all new information, and it just lets us keep doing these events. So thank you, Graeme, thank you, Eve. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.